At exactly 5:47 on a cold Wednesday morning, 72-year-old Walter Greene slowly opened his front door to grab the newspaper when he noticed something bright red hanging from his mailbox. At first, he thought it was an advertisement, but the moment he pulled it closer, his hands started shaking. It was an official HOA notice stamped with the words "Final Community Warning." According to the HOA, Walter now faced nearly $8,000 in fines for persistent nuisance behavior and repeated disturbance complaints. Walter stood silently on the porch rereading the paper while neighbors drove past, pretending not to stare. The disturbance they were accusing him of wasn't loud music or criminal activity. It was the fact that Walter's autistic grandson sometimes made loud noises outside during sensory episodes. And within weeks, the HOA president responsible for targeting the elderly man would become the center of one of the ugliest scandals the neighborhood had ever seen. Walter was a retired Vietnam veteran living quietly in a Florida neighborhood after losing his wife several years earlier. Most days he cared for his 9-year-old grandson Mason, while Mason's mother worked double shifts at a hospital nearby. Mason was autistic and occasionally struggled with sensory overload. Sometimes he became overwhelmed and shouted unexpectedly or paced in circles outside to calm himself down. Walter always stayed beside him during those moments, making sure Mason remained safe and comfortable. Most neighbors understood the situation and treated the family kindly, but everything changed after HOA President Denise Harper moved into the neighborhood. Denise treated the HOA like a personal kingdom. She constantly complained about children, noise, decorations, and parked cars. Residents quickly learned she enjoyed controlling people, but she especially disliked Mason almost immediately. Several neighbors later admitted hearing Denise complain that the boy was disrupting the peaceful atmosphere of the neighborhood. At first, Walter tried ignoring the comments because he didn't want conflict, but then the official violations started arriving. The first notice claimed Walter allowed excessive noise disturbances outside his home. Walter politely contacted the HOA office, explaining Mason's autism and sensory condition. Denise responded coldly, saying community rules applied equally to everyone. Soon, more notices started arriving weekly. One violation accused Mason of aggressive behavior because he occasionally flapped his arms and shouted when overwhelmed. Another claimed neighbors felt unsafe seeing him pacing outside repeatedly. Walter couldn't believe what he was reading. Mason was a harmless child who mostly loved dinosaurs and drawing cartoons, but Denise kept escalating the situation anyway. Within 2 months, the HOA claimed Walter owed thousands in fines. Things became truly humiliating after Denise started publicly targeting Mason during HOA meetings. At one meeting, Denise complained about children lacking proper behavioral discipline while directly staring at Walter across the room. Several residents looked uncomfortable, immediately realizing who she meant. Walter calmly stood up and explained Mason's autism to the room. He described how sensory overload affected the boy and how they were doing everything possible to manage stressful situations safely. Most residents listened sympathetically, but Denise interrupted him before he finished and claimed the community should not have to accommodate constant disruptions. The room instantly fell silent. Even several board members looked shocked hearing her say it out loud. After that meeting, support for Walter quietly spread throughout the neighborhood. Parents started bringing Mason small gifts and greeting him kindly whenever they saw him outside. One elderly neighbor even wrote a letter to the HOA defending Walter publicly. Denise responded by becoming even more aggressive. Walter suddenly received violations unrelated to Mason entirely. The HOA cited him for lawn maintenance, trash bin placement, and even a faded American flag hanging near the garage. Residents slowly realized Denise wasn't enforcing rules fairly anymore. She was personally targeting the family. Then everything escalated one afternoon during the neighborhood barbecue. Mason became overwhelmed by loud music and too many people nearby. As Walter guided him back toward their home, Denise loudly complained in front of several residents that Mason was ruining community events again. Walter calmly asked her to stop speaking about his grandson that way. Instead, Denise mocked Mason openly by imitating the sounds he sometimes made during sensory episodes. Multiple residents stood frozen in disbelief, watching a grown woman mock an autistic child. One neighbor secretly recorded the entire confrontation on a phone. That video would later spread everywhere. Walter returned home furious but heartbroken. That evening, Mason quietly asked his grandfather whether the neighbors hated him. Walter nearly broke down hearing the question. The next morning, several residents visited Walter's house after seeing the video online. People were outraged. Even homeowners who normally avoided HOA drama admitted Denise had crossed a line. Then more residents started sharing their own experiences with her. One family said Denise repeatedly complained about their daughter with Down syndrome playing outside too loudly. Another homeowner revealed Denise once suggested disabled children belonged in special communities. The deeper people looked, the worse the stories became. Walter eventually hired an attorney after Denise threatened legal action over unpaid fines. While reviewing HOA records, the attorney discovered Denise had selectively approved violations almost entirely against families with disabled children or elderly residents. Worse, internal HOA emails revealed Denise privately referred to several children as neighborhood burdens. One message specifically called Mason that screaming boy, lowering property values. The attorney immediately realized the HOA faced serious discrimination complaints. Once local reporters learned about the viral video and HOA emails, the story exploded online. News stations began interviewing residents outside the neighborhood entrance. Denise tried defending herself publicly, claiming she simply enforced community standards equally. Nobody believed her anymore. The video of her mocking Mason publicly during the barbecue spread rapidly on social media, and public outrage became overwhelming. Residents started organizing petitions demanding her resignation immediately. Then, investigators uncovered something even worse. HOA financial records showed Denise approved thousands of dollars in legal spending, specifically targeting homeowners involved in disability disputes. Several fines issued against families with disabled children were found to violate federal housing protections entirely. County officials quickly launched formal investigations into the HOA's practices. At the next HOA meeting, angry residents packed the clubhouse so tightly people stood outside listening through open doors. Walter sat quietly near the front, holding Mason's hand, while homeowners demanded answers from Denise. One resident projected screenshots of Denise's emails onto a wall. Another played the viral video showing Denise mocking Mason publicly during the barbecue. The room erupted with shouting almost instantly. Denise tried defending herself, but nobody listened anymore. Then someone at the entrance announced county investigators had arrived. Seconds later, officials entered the building alongside sheriff deputies carrying evidence boxes. The room went completely silent as investigators informed the board they were seizing HOA records related to discrimination complaints and financial misconduct allegations. Denise's face immediately lost color while deputies carried computers and financial binders out of the office. Within weeks, multiple lawsuits were filed against the HOA and Denise personally. Denise resigned shortly afterward while continuing to deny wrongdoing publicly. Walter's fines were completely dismissed, and the HOA was forced to issue formal policy changes involving disability accommodations and anti-discrimination protections. Several families previously targeted by the HOA also had violations erased entirely. But the moment residents remembered most happened several months later during the neighborhood's annual holiday gathering. Instead of avoiding Mason, families invited him directly into games and activities throughout the evening. At one point, Mason became overwhelmed briefly and started pacing near the clubhouse. Before Walter could even stand up, several neighbors calmly joined Mason outside and helped comfort him together.
Walter stood quietly watching with tears in his eyes, because for the first time in months his grandson no longer looked afraid of the people around him.